Okay, let's call this meeting to order. Kristen will be coming late, and I'll try to muddle through till she gets here. Tonight is a work session on the budget. It's the first time that the board has met with staff to go through the budget, and so I don't know exactly who's going to present what, but what are your wishes? You're looking at everybody.
Well, and what the way we've kind of done this in the past is we've kind of started off, if you remember how Chairman Bates led it, we kind of started off talking about revenue.
Okay.
So we kind of worked through, where are our taxes coming in, what do we project coming in, what do we have? So if you guys would like to start there, just to kind of, Karen can kind of walk us through that.
Okay.
And then also we have the big picture budget development concepts FY19, where she's kind of put everything together in a narrative. So if you guys want to do that, start with revenue, then maybe move to budget concepts, then we can work on the details if you guys want to, if that's okay with you.
Okay, and I'm going to tell the board that it's really difficult to see your lights. So if you'll put them up to the edge here where I can see them when you want to speak, we're kind of lined up here. So
Yeah, just a quick comment. If you don't mind us starting with the big picture budget concepts, it kind of starts with the year we're in.
I would rather do that.
And then we'll fold into revenue after that.
I would actually, I think starting with the big picture and any questions, discussion about that, and then we could move on to budget summary and questions as well. I think revenue pretty much is what you think it is now. There's some variables in there that we don't know yet.
Right.
So I don't know,
I'll talk about that.
Yeah, all right, that'll be fine, thanks.
Okay. All right, well, I'll go ahead and begin. If everyone has a copy of the big picture budget concepts, it's the Word document, some money at the top. Just to kind of start and look at where we are now, because we're planning on where we're going. So where are we now? FY Budget 18. As you know, each month we're closely monitoring the revenues and expenditures. You're getting a report in your board agenda each month. One of the things that we're keeping an eye on is the big teacher line item. Based on some action that was taken early on in the FY18 year, that particular line item was underfunded or under budgeted, assuming that some BEP growth funds would be coming in later to offset expenditures. And I know Ron's been monitoring that line item, and as of the time of us printing this document, we felt like what we'd be getting in with BEP, we'd probably still be short by $100,000 that we would have to make up somewhere else in the budget. So, and since then, we received our BEP estimate for FY19, which was a little less than we expected it would be based on growth and that kind of thing. So we're not sure exactly how much we're going to receive for FY18 yet, and I've been in contact with the state, and we usually receive that information in May. However, their reports are hung up somehow at the state. It has nothing to do with us. And she indicated that we would not have information on that till June, which really is going to make it a challenge for us to make sure that line item's covered. But just to let you know that we're on top of it.
Yeah, and in addition, Carl Lang is going back with Jennifer Morgan, our person that runs the numbers with our student information system, to be sure that every single student that we have average daily attendance is what's figured into the state EIS system. So we're double checking to make 100% sure that those numbers are completely accurate.
Question at that point. These are additional teachers we have this year, right? That y'all listed down here, additions, action taken.
Yes.
And we've had an increase in students, haven't we?
Yes.
Okay, so how do we have less BEP money if teachers and students equal money? I don't understand the decrease.
We don't have less BEP money. We're just not getting as much as we expected to get. So it is an increase.
In addition.
In addition,
Okay.
yes,
All right.
it is in addition, yes.
And that's why Dr. Marzak was saying that, we're going back, and the people that are responsible for attendance, we're having to check that to make sure that that's correct, because every student that's missed is money. So they're working on that system of.
Okay, thank you.
And that unclaimed money, if the school systems don't go after and get it, rolls into the surplus at the state level. So we're wanting to make sure that we're not sending any money to the surplus at the state by June 30th.
Okay, thank you. I can't see. Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Mr.
Thank you, Ms. Kitzer. So there's basically two different things that can affect the BEP money that the state may send to us. One is enrollment. If our enrollment increases, then the calculator changes and it spits out a bigger number.
Yes.
And I think that's one thing that you're talking about that you all are looking at as far as enrollment. The other thing that can change what our BEP funding is if the governor and the legislature get together and they vote on an increase to
Yes.
BEP, which they've done for the last several years. Have you all heard anything as far as the status of that? Is the governor making a proposal to increase BEP funding this year? And have you all received any input from any of the legislative contacts?
Well, were presented a little bit different this year in this first April estimate because there's usually a cover sheet on it, tells you what's included. And in the case of ours, they included a increase to the salary component, which is, the formula has a salary that they use as a representative salary for generating dollars, and they increased that particular salary by 2%. And then that percentage carries out through the formula. So if, X amount of teachers times that salary versus times the old salary. So that's in there. Some RTI positions have been put in there. Normally, when it's the governor's proposal, it's named as that. So we're uncertain at this time if that is yet to come. If just the BEP funds they had at the state was enough to increase the salary component, or if that is in fact the governor's initiative. And next week, I will be going to the state fiscal workshop, so I'm sure there will be some clarification at that point on that.
Now, this week, if you read a lot of the articles that were coming out talking about TN Ready, such as in the Tennessean, they said that the legislature put budget talks and discussions on hold while they addressed TN Ready and moved to do that emergency legislation to hold schools and districts harmless. So we're unsure at this point if this currently includes the governor increases that he was talking about, $500 million in surplus for salaries, because everything's been put on hold to deal with TN Ready at this point. So when Karen heads over to Murfreesboro? Lebanon. When she heads over to Lebanon, we'll know more at that point.
So right now, we don't know whether this April estimate that we got from the state includes or doesn't include proposed increases to funding by the governor, I guess.
Right, there was nothing specifically named as his initiative. However, that salary component was bumped up. So that's where I'm hoping I can get some clarification.
Which the salary number would bump up if our enrollment increases, correct? Don't they
No.
allocate so much funding? The number of students gives you so much funding for salary components, for all of
right.
those different components.
Right, what happens is ADM, average daily membership, that's the driver for how many teachers you get, how many classroom supplies you get, that generates everything. But then within the formula, the amount that they say each teacher should be allocated, that's the part that I said was bumped up as well. So that piece of the puzzle, and that's usually the part that the governor's proposal deals with. However, they didn't name it that way this time, so there might be more to come there. But at this point, it's just named as a salary component increase. Okay. So the next part of this document just kind of gives you a summary of what's happened throughout the year since you approved the budget, what positions were added, and at what location. The next section of the document, and I'm going to kind of go along unless you flag me to stop, and because I won't read everything to you, but I'm going to highlight. The next section is your enrollment projections, and it's by building and by grade. And you can see the total elementary impact, middle school and high school. The total for the whole district is an increase of 346 students. And you can see where they fall. The next page is dealing with letting you know that in the 1920 year, with the onset of the new schools, that we're having to do some preparation and planning in FY19 budget in the areas of supplies and materials and personnel and benefits, and you can see there what's been included in the budget is pre-planning for that.
A question, wouldn't we have to have guidance counselors in place by next spring for scheduling and maybe secretarial staff for that as well? I mean, you're talking about, or whenever,
So we had only talked to this point of doing a principal and a bookkeeper
okay.
to go ahead and get staff hired to go ahead, but we are going to need to hire a librarian. There's going to need to be a guidance counselor because unlike a fifth grade teacher,
Right,
where you can reduce numbers here, you can't replicate a guidance counselor in two different places. We could possibly do, since we're not talking about adding new students,
Right.
we could possibly talk about a guidance counselor sharing their position between Spring Hill and Battle Creek, because we're not talking about increased enrollment of kids at this point. We're talking about reallocation of current students.
okay,
So we could do sharing.
because they would have schedules ready prior to, they'd be
Yes, ma'am.
before
Yes.
school's out, okay.
Okay, oh, do you have a question? I'll tell you.
Thank you, Ms. Kinzer. So under the personnel lines that you have for Battle Creek, is that for the principal position and the bookkeeper position? Is that what that reflects?
For a half year only, starting in January.
Okay. Now, is that the total cost, or is that just the local portion?
That's total cost, salary, and benefits for a half year.
All right, so one thing to keep in mind, the way the complicated BEP formula works is they do pay for, the state pays for a principal per school. So we will get extra BEP funding for each one of those schools for the principal position, I think a secretary position, I think a library position. I'm not sure about the bookkeeper. But just make sure that we're following up with the state to call them up to say, hey, guys, these two schools are about to come online. We just want to make sure y'all, update your formula. We don't want them to short us on that. So that may help to offset some of that.
They take all of our staffing data from the personnel report that has to go in from here, so that's where that'll be reflected.
Okay. So just make sure, I guess, the personnel report is updated. Make sure maybe it's highlighted that they catch that.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Is the BEP, do we get don't we, isn't it after the fact we open a school that BEP money would be forthcoming, or not prior to, though?
Well, our dollars are generated on our ADMs from the year before.
Okay, but would be no ADMs for a school that hadn't been open. So
Right.
these funds we'd have to be all of it for us.
Well, but then during the year, they look at what's actually materialized in enrollment.
After school
So
starts.
we would get some kind of a bump during the middle of the year.
Okay.
Ms. Kinzer, if I could just follow up on that. It is a very convoluted formula. There is a section on there that is based upon ADM, which is purely based upon enrollment. There are other sections on there, the way that they fund is by schools. So they actually provide principal funding per school. So even if the enrollment stays the same, just having that school. Now, you're correct, I don't know when would be their magic time when they
Right.
say, okay, yeah, we're gonna give you the funding. Is it when, the official day that the door opens? I'm not sure if that's fair, because you probably need to have a principal in place that summer before school starts. So is it at the date of the hire? I think it's just something incumbent upon staff to take a look at. Just make sure that the state is treating us fairly.
Okay. Okay, moving on to
Pause, sorry. There is one thing that's going to change under supplies and materials for Battle Creek Elementary School and Battle Creek Middle School. Lori Stanton, our head nurse over at Coordinated School Health, realized that we didn't have clinic supplies built in, so that's $3,500 each school, so that's going to increase by $7,000 because we've got to buy clinic supplies to be ready for the first day of school. So we can't figure that in the FY20 budget. That's got to be figured in the FY19 budget. So those are on place for the first day of school. So that's the only thing that's going to change in that one.
Okay, looking at new expenditures, continuing on with that. Staffing, of course, is going to be based on the number of students and the student-teacher ratio guidelines that we're required to follow. Compensation and benefits, a step cost. This budget includes a step cost to those employees that are on salary schedules. The cost for salary alone to grant that step is $675,000. with the benefits that go with that, FICA, Medicare, and retirement, it's a cost of $794,000. Salaries and the cost of living. This is not included in the budget yet. This is something that the board would decide on at some point throughout the budget where we are with revenues and expenditures, what you can afford. But just to give you the information, a 1% salary increase to give that to the entire staff would be $624,000 and $541. With the benefits that go along with that, it's an additional $106,000 or a total of $731,000 for each 1%.
Karen?
Oh, yes.
I just want to point out to the board that those step raises are not for everyone. There are about
That's
280 employees who will not get step raises because they have maxed out the salary scale.
Or they're not on a scale.
Or they're not on a scale,
Yeah.
exactly, which is about 30%.
Okay, good point. The retirement rates, wanted to let you know that the certified staff rate is increasing from 9.04% to 10.46%. This impacts the budget at a cost of $743,000. The retirement for non-certified staff will stay the same at 4.62. Health and dental insurance, the board, just to remind you, the board pays 100% of the single coverage of each employee, regardless of the plan chosen, and 45% of the premium if the employee elects dependent coverage. It goes through your current cost ranges, depending on the plans, and we were looking at an estimate of an increase of approximately 10% with, that's a calendar year, so since we're fiscal, that would be 5%. However, we just received information today that it's projected to increase no higher than 3%. So we'll be at a 1.5% increase, which will save us about $100,000 off of the budget you have before you right now. And for the dental plan, we had projected possibly 8%, which would mean 4% to us. It's actually coming in at 3.4%. So the increase for the fiscal year is 1.7%, which will save us about $10,000 from what you had in your totals. Life insurance is going to stay the same. That's an annual cost to the board of $60 per employee. Any questions on that part?
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. If we could go back to staffing,
Okay.
do we have a good feeling on our staff, the amount, and how we arrived at our staff numbers?
Are you talking about projections?
No.
Or are you talking about what was
Anticipated. Yeah.
Oh, Battle Creek. And what do you, when you talk about staffing, you mean talking about what we want to add halfway through the year with a principal and a bookkeeper to get the school kind of up and running?
Yeah, what we talked about here, the overall numbers of positions required will depend upon the final enrollment,
Oh, that's for the whole district.
the whole district.
Yes, okay. Projections. Ron?
I want to make sure I understand what you're asking, Mr. Beaver, with regard to Battle Creek.
Okay,
No, it's not Battle Creek, the whole district.
if you go to the anticipated new expenditures, that's what I'm asking there.
Okay. Yes, this is correct. Will depend upon the final enrollment.
So this is based on these numbers here?
Are you asking about the current enrollment projections?
These right here, right?
Up on the board, yeah.
Okay, the staffing that you're talking about here. All right, of course, you're gonna staff by the amount of students enrolled in the school, correct?
Correct.
So that's what I'm.
ask Mr. Gaines if he could speak to the title, the federal. Were any federal positions purchased, in terms of teachers purchased with federal dollars for Whitthorne?
Any positions at Whitthorne in the, funded by federal funds would be supplemental. So if you're thinking about class size positions, we couldn't use federal funds to reduce the class size or make the class size equal. That had to be supplemental to the general purpose program. So there are some positions projected to be funded at Whitthorne, but they would be supplemental positions.
I think you're talking about a projection, but I'm talking about the way they did it last year.
Right.
Again, that's just,
I believe Whitthorne did something with their class size and pushed it up close to the edge to allow them to free a position to fund a dean of students. Is that what you're referring to?
that may be one, but I did not. I mean, I know that there is a dean of students, but again, when I was told how things were going to be so much better this year, it included new positions, and I was told that they were coming out of title. And again, I hesitate to bring attention to it because with our needs staff, but again, I am expecting legit numbers and oversight. So I basically, thank you. I don't think that he was not in that position probably at the time that the plan was made. I just think it would be prudent for us to ask good questions and give proper oversight.
So let me just add for a minute. Whitthorne did move up in the ranking, so they do have anticipated more funding. So they could have said, yes, we are able to fund more positions, and they do have more positions that they're proposing to be funded in their title budget. So that is true. They are receiving more funding because they moved up in the ranking. So they are planning to add more positions to their, i.e. more interventionists, supplemental interventionists to their program. So yes, they are planning to add more positions there, but they would be supplemental to the program.
I think the question is, these additional 4 teachers at Whitthorne, were they hired by the school district and funded through the school district and not funded through the federal program? Am I right? That's what I think the question is.
And I would say yes, they will be funded by the school district, correct?
Okay, that's this year.
Correct.
Okay, so these were not the Title I funds that
Correct.
funded these. Okay.
Yep, we're at revenue on page 5. This is just a quick summary of the different categories of revenue that you have, what was budgeted for FY18, and what's forecasted for FY19. And we'll get into a little bit more of that later, some more details. I will say that the 2 largest are, of course, the county revenue and the state revenue. And the county revenue, I met with Mr. Lukonen, and we spoke about the history of property tax and sales tax, and he shared with me the formulas he used, and I felt like it was a good move for us to be on the same page with them since they're the funding body. And so he gave me some insights on what to use as far as the value of a penny and all that. We'll get to that. And then we looked at the average collections of sales tax by the month, and he explained the whole cycle of that and how the quarters are higher and all of that. So was very, very helpful, and that's the numbers that are represented. You know, as we get into the revenue, we'll get a little more detailed on that. But this is just an overall look. It kind of tells you, if it was a pie chart, the largest pieces, and we'll see a pie chart later. Then moving on into page 6, this is just sort of a recap of state and federal grants, just to give you an idea, because a lot of times you don't have a lot of information up front about grants. A lot of things happen behind the scenes. So this is just purely informational. And the next few pages go into some of the details about the grants you receive, what they're used for, the amounts. And again, they're just for information. And then we have a category of other grants, Coordinated School Health, that's from the state, Family Resource Center, and Safe Schools Act. Are there any questions about grants? I'm going to kind of move it along unless we have questions. Okay, go ahead.
Board members, I'd like to mention one thing about our family resource centers. We currently have 3 family resource centers located in our county, and basically those are grant-funded positions. We get one amount of revenue that pays for 3 directors. So 3 directors split one lump sum, and because that position is grant-funded, I'd like for you to consider at some point maybe thinking about for us to raise the dollar amount for those individuals. It's greatly needed, and they did not receive, of course, the 3% salary increase, and so I'd like to see them maybe get a little bit of a bump if you kind of put that on your radar and consider that. 3 people right now, 3 people split $89,000. So that's between 3 directors. So just something I want to put on your radar. May not be appropriate for this time, but at some point I'd love to come back to that conversation and look at how we can greater support our family resource centers.
And they are really an integral part of the schools, and they really serve a tremendous need.
Yes, sir, Mr. Moore. I was thinking, yes, sir. I was thinking $3,000 each for each person, $9,000 total, $3,000 each. As we went through this budget process, we thought about where can we trim the fat, and I thought, everything that was not the utmost necessity, we would trim it, and so we did trim that. But I did want to come back and just put it on your radar. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on. The next section is just a recap of fund balance estimate, and this is just like what you're seeing every month, but it sort of takes it to the end and shows you what kind of balance we'd have above the 3% that's required, the 2.8 million. So the moral of this little story is at this point in time, you really don't have money to draw on to offset expenditures in the next budget unless something drastically changes. Okay, moving on. Anticipated next budget. What service changes are anticipated and what will they cost? So each of the areas, pupil services, the alternative school program, have listed some information there for you. We have a little section on operational expenditures, electricity, gas, water, sewer, things that we can't really control, that have to be part of the budget. They're included here to give you an idea of what's being projected. Additional technology specialists for the diploma initiative, a purchasing agent, facilities contracts administrator, additional bus drivers and attendant. Goes into the next page of capital funds. The initiative we wanted was $2 million, but only $1 million is included in this budget. Instructional technology initiatives for support of the technology services, and there's a large write-up about diploma and where you've been and where you're going on that. The keys to college and career readiness is another section and initiative of the system. There's a recap there of that. And then we added just a small paragraph about the fact that we are implementing the Allaview budget module. We actually implemented it during this process, so it is built in Allaview by location, every building. And going forward, we'll be able to give training to principals and department heads so that they will be able to access their budget to monitor it. And Allaview is matched up with Skyward. And the nice thing about it is building our budget in Allaview, when we finish and get to the end of it, Allaview can actually upload it into Skyward, all the details. It won't have to be hand entered. So that'll be wonderful. And we just included some screenshots there to kind of show you what Allaview looks like. It's super user-friendly, and those that have already used it can attest to how easy it is. So, and they're working on improving components of their budget system. So I'm thinking by next year they'll have a revenue component that we can also use. So any questions about that document? If not, we'll move on to the one that has all the colors, the budget impact summary. The purpose of this sheet is to just kind of categorize things for you, what's included, what the cost is, what's not included, and then we get to the bottom line of where we are. The keys expenditures in the blue area, these are the items that have been earmarked and included for FY19.
Does that, the RTI, is there 5 positions we're thinking maybe it's going to be funded by the state? Or how many positions RTI?
So on the BEP, check, on the BEP document, we received funding for 4.5 positions at the maximum salary that the state provides. And that maximum salary amount, Karen, is?
Yeah, the total we got was 149,371
Okay,
for
gotcha.
RTI.
So, and what we can do is
In the BEP figure,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, that's okay. You're good, Karen. And remember that it's not a budget document. It's a funding formula. So we can take that RTI money and we can basically do whatever we want with it. So we can take that current pot and still do the part-time $38,000 positions that you guys created 2 years ago. So we can do that. So that will offset and has the ability to offset that $836,000, which are basically, I believe, 20 requests for 22 positions from schools.
Okay. We have a section in yellow there for the new schools. We sort of thought that that would be something the county would support, since it has to do with new schools and it kind of goes along with startup. The green area is some new staffing. This year, you had a budget amendment to fund an extra pre-K teacher, so that's basically continuing here. The audit recommended possibly having a purchasing agent in Stan's area to kind of watch over purchasing. Some technology specialists that, you know, as we're adding schools and staff, we need that, and tech and devices. And then an HR associate to work in the HR office. For the audit. And then the next section is contracts or previous commitments. And some of these were, well, most of these were on the list that you funded with fund balance this year. The parallel fees and the substitute budgets, custodial services, and the internet and phone. So you can see there that what amount carries forward there. In the gray area, some of the initiatives, textbooks.
Back up just a minute.
Oh, sorry.
And I realize, I don't know if Amanda's here or not, but that is an increase. I know, we haven't voted on whether we're going to do parallel another year. That was, we took that out of fund balance, and so that'll be a discussion we'll have at some point. But it's a tremendous increase. Number one, we're paying $20 per person to be in a classroom. And I've kind of been thinking, too, that for Discovery Ed, we've got coaches that we pay $1,500 a year supplement, and they are taken out of the classroom to go to meetings. There's about, I'm not sure of the number, but I'm thinking that there is, how many, 20-something, 23? How many coaches are there, one in each school?
96 coaches.
96 coaches. So every time they go to a meeting, and I would assume that a coach at the school would be a premier teacher in that school, right, that's what you would want. And every time they attend a meeting, they have to have a substitute.
Yes.
So we're paying them a stipend, which I totally agree with, but we're taking them out of the classroom for meetings, paying parallel $20 extra in addition to the 60 or 80 for the substitute. And now parallel wants more money. So I kind of have a problem with that, and maybe that's something we need to discuss further. I don't know if it's worth, I'd like to know the fill rate too. I'd
Yeah.
like that,
Yeah.
to know that when we really get down to making these decisions.
Sure.
Okay, we'll move on to capital maintenance. I mentioned earlier, we had included $1 million in capital maintenance. Compensation and benefits, we talked about the cost of the step and the benefits and the retirement and health changes. And then down in the next section was the information about the cost of living, each 1%, based on, that is not included again. That'll be based on revenue. And on the second page, we list some of the revenue offsets to the budget, these lists of items that we've talked about that impact the budget. The sales tax amount that's included is actually $17,050,000, and what that represents over FY18 is an increase of about $1,700,000. The property tax, the current value of the penny is $177,391. The district receives 113 pennies of the tax rate. In talking to Mr. Lukonen, he suggested that we used $180,000 per penny, and hoped that it would become $185,000 per penny. If it were to increase to the 185 range, it would mean about $595,000 for that increase. So right now, the property tax is only an increase of $294,000 over FY18 budget. And the
Madam
BEP formula, oh, sorry.
I was just wondering, on your capital maintenance, if you've said that we really need 2 million, what was the thought process in only asking for 1?
We're getting there. You got to scroll down a little bit more. Give us about 5 more minutes.
It'll answer your question.
Okay.
Okay, and then BEP represents an increase of $876,000, like we talked about earlier. At this point, each month we'll get an update. Okay, then the next section are items that were requested
What
but
are
not
art
funded.
stipends?
That's an old copy, and we removed that.
Okay.
It doesn't belong there.
All right.
Yeah, and I can explain that, what happened. So what we were doing was, we were talking about adding art stipends, much like the athletic stipends, much like a football coach gets a stipend for coaching the team. Somebody that does elementary school chorus, where they spend so many hours outside of the school day, yeah, exactly, would get that as well. What we found out today is that there's not as much wiggle room in the current budget as we see it. So we're going to have to go back and recalculate, and then kind of figure out what that. We were thinking we could fit it in what was currently budgeted, but we learned today that we can't. So we're going to have to recalculate that number. So that could be another offset. The number we were looking at was doing kind of like what athletics does. So if we budgeted 1 at every single elementary school, middle school, and high school, what would that number be? We're coming up with a number of a maximum of $114,000. And so we're taking that back to the drawing board starting tomorrow morning to relook at that again. So that was actually pulled off.
Okay, the next section were items that were requested and not funded. And the last section is basically the bottom line. Without any additional revenue, just to date, our revenue is $99 million. Our expenditures are $108 million. So the difference is $8.9 million. So that's kind of why we didn't add the other million in capital.
And there is one, just to explain, there is one offsetting thing that's going to bring that number down a little bit. So if you go back to the beginning of the budget concepts document where we underfunded the 71, 100, 116 line in order to make the 3% raise happen, as that BEP money is coming in and it has to be rebudgeted this year, that means that the budget number this year will raise. So our budget by the end of the year, by June 30th, won't be 99, 156, 998. When we get that final BEP and we go to the county commission and we adjust the FY18 budget, that number will raise up and this number will come down, but we don't think it's going to be greater than 900,000.
Okay, I have to comment. It's great total revenue, 99 million, but 8.9 million, and there is nothing in this budget that I've seen, and I have studied this on the as well, increase for teachers. Yet I do see some increases for central office people throughout, and I don't see how you can ask us to approve a budget that increases and ask the taxpayers to fund this in excess of $9 million or 8 or 7 or whatever it's going to be, and there's not one penny been allocated for teacher raises. I understand that the governor or the legislature will at some point give us a dollar figure, or some dollars for that. But I would expect those to be put on the teacher's salary and used for that, nothing else. And I'm sure you would feel that way yourself.
Completely. Whatever we get from the governor, my recommendation is 100% salaries for employees.
Right.
Agreed.
But as I peruse this, as I'm sure board members have done or will do, and you look at the line items and see where there are raises and substantial raises in some areas, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about other areas, and yet we haven't, but hopefully will,
Yes.
address teacher salaries. The other thing, and you know how much I preached this last year, and I've been working on figures, and I appreciate that Amanda gave me a training and experience chart today so I can look at that. We are like 70th in the state in beginning salaries, and we need to do something about that. We could raise our beginning salary to $38,552, and Karen, just keep that in mind. I'm going to give
Okay.
you a little piece of paper here. And I know we won't make any decisions about this. I just want people to kind of assimilate that just a minute. We talked about it last year. You could freeze it. In Metro, they freeze theirs 5 years. You could freeze that 38,522, and I came up with that figure because that's what third year is now. And so if you were to say at 0 year, 38,500, it would make us comparable and competitive with all the surrounding counties. At year 1, you would still be 38,522, and at year 2, same salary. At that time, it would be a 0 extra cost. The cost of that once again, I'm not, a computer whiz, but I believe it would be about $173,000 if you considered you have some on the T&E that have doctorates, a few masters and bachelor. I just wish it's something we could look at, and I'll be glad to share that with you as well. I think it's really important that we recruit. We're going to have how many schools on the Williamson-Murray County line? We've got to recruit the best teachers, and we've got to keep them. We've got to retain them so that they want to come to our county and work, be in those brand new schools. And that beginning salary is what they may not look at insurance, and I know how important that is, that we have 100% insurance. That doesn't need to change. But I know that beginning salary for a teacher is what they're going to look at. So I really hope we'll consider that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to preach that long, but we'll move on. Anybody else?
You might want to even consider a multi-year plan that, includes that. And then one thing that was successful in Oak Ridge is they had the first 5 years of their schedule was really bumped up. I mean, you got significant increases, and they felt like if you kept the teacher for 5 years that they would stay after that. So that's another theory. It's something
That
to
would
look
be
at.
worth looking at too, as well. Anything to recruit and retain. Is there a light on that I'm not seeing?
I
Okay.
just want to be sure that,
Ms.
I'm at the party.
Powers.
So this is basically, to use the analogy, this would be like me having a job saying that I'm going to make $99,000 a year, but I'm spending 108,000 a year, right? Like, that's kind of where we are, and then we're gonna go through this and explain, like, where all that 108,000 is going, even though at the end of the day, I'm only making 99, so there's still a gap, right? Okay.
Madam Chair. When we're talking about starting salaries and that, I would like, because of the way things are reported and get blown out, I would like the benefits, say 38,522 plus yearly benefits and put the dollar amount in there. We don't have to do that now. I'm saying when so that's figured in there because that is actually part of salary is the benefits.
It definitely is, but I would assume when you all go to recruiting things, that's one of the big things that we use as a recruiting, is, I think, but as far as telling a brand new person out of, I don't know that they would totally understand that, but I think it's worthy, of course.
It's kind of considered the total package.
Yes, I think that
Instead
the
of
total,
just salary.
absolutely. Anyone else?
So one of the things I'd like to point out up here is, one of the things we looked at with the budget impact summary was what are the things that we have to fund that are coming up for FY19. So what we have to fund is what's up for Battle Creek. We have to fund contracts previous commitments. That is something that you talked about. If the board decides to roll back parallel, then that may not be a have to fund. We looked at the compensation and benefits have to fund. And that number came out to be total. We're looking at a 7% increase of the budget. 4.2% of the 7% is have to funds, which is about $4,002,937. So when we start to look at what we're going to need to just basically operate next year on where we are right now, it's at least a 4.2 increase of the current budget about where we are.
Has there been any discussion from the commission about maintenance of effort yet?
No, ma'am, not yet. We don't have to talk to Scott Sumner's. Our budget doesn't have to go to the county commission until the first week in June, which will be June 4th, 5th, and 6th. So a lot of time to have discussions between now and then.
Where are we going from here? Any other discussion, comments? All right.
Ms. Kins, I just want to say thank you for your comments, and I totally echo what you're saying about raising the starting teaching salaries. We compete with 3 other districts that have really high salaries, and that's Franklin Special, Williamson County, and Metro Nashville. And so we do want to attract and recruit the best people that we can find, but it is really difficult when we try to go against those districts that pay a whole lot more, especially when we talk about teachers in the high needs areas. And those high needs areas are Spanish, special ed, math, and chemistry and biology. So it's really difficult to get some of those folks here with salaries that are much higher. But so thank you.
Well, I really feel strongly about that, and so hopefully we can find a way to make it work.
So moving on to the document with all the numbers and the details with the logo on the front. The very first page is just your revenue by source. This is just a little graph to show. And there's a little typo down there because there should be a local and a other local, but you can see it's so small on the graph it doesn't really, but the label's wrong, so we'll fix that. The next page is the
Ms. Kinsman.
revenue projections for FY19.
Ms. Kinsman? That's okay.
Officially,
okay.
Mr. Bates.
Yes, thank you. He did have a question about the revenue box. I think it's like,
Okay.
would be the 3rd page. I see that on the property tax, looks like year to date, we're at around 20.1 million. And if I'm looking at this correctly, this is as of March. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so actually on property tax, we're a little bit over what we budgeted for the year already, but
We are.
I guess the way property tax works, most of those payments probably have already come in. So we're probably not going to see a lot more coming in at this
These
point.
last few months are usually really low.
Yeah, I would think so. Now, looking at the sales tax, I see that to date, through March, we've had about 11.4 come in on sales tax.
Mhm.
And if, and my math may have been maybe off, but I try to extrapolate out if that's, try to figure out, what is coming in per month and how much does that extrapolate out for a year. And if my math was right, that forecast that we'll be getting about 5.2 for the year at the end of the year. Does that sound about right to you?
5.2.
Which is close to what we budgeted for the year.
You mean 17 mil, or, I mean, 15
So what I was trying to
million?
figure out is, so if we've already got 11.4 through March, what are we going to have
Oh,
total for the
5.2
year?
more is what you're saying.
No,
Okay.
not more, but I think 15.2 would be the total
Yes.
projected for the year. If my math is right, if I'm trying to extrapolate out what an average month so far is, what is going to be the total that's going to come in through June of this year. And so if that's correct, if my math is right, and we collect about 15.2, that's close to what we budgeted. So we're pretty close to
I
what
would
we
agree.
anticipated.
Yeah, because when we pulled these figures in March, we were 75% of the way through.
Okay.
And that's what we've received, so it's kind of right on.
Okay.
It should be very close.
All right. So, but then as far as what you all are currently proposing for next year, you all are proposing to increase that budget to around 17. And I just wanted to kind of get your thought process on
Okay.
what your math was or what your thought process was there.
Sure. That goes back to my discussion with Mr. Lukonen, and he said that looking at our collections by month, that he thought it was safe to do 1.3 million a month. That was the average, and that came to the 17,050,000. The actual average is a little bit more than that, but we were trying to be conservative. He said December is always the best because of Christmas, so that kind of skews it. The first 7 months include January, so there's some kind of break in quarters where larger businesses report in quarters, smaller businesses do monthly. So there's this impact on quarters, and since January is a quarter and October is a quarter.
So basically, it's input from the county is
Yes.
telling us that that's what they
Yes.
forecast for next
Yes.
year as far as coming in with revenue.
Right.
And I think that's
I
good
was
to
a little
hear.
uncomfortable with it myself,
Okay.
but based on his history and knowledge of, what's coming in and what they're looking at on the horizon as far as new businesses.
Okay.
So I think that's an impact to it too.
Okay.
That
Well, I think that's good to hear that that's maybe based upon their data. That's what they're
Yes.
looking at and forecasting, because there is a little bit of a selling part to that, because that's going to increase the maintenance of effort. And so that's where they get a little bit nervous anytime you increase what the budget for revenue
Yes.
was versus last year, because if it comes under, then they're on the hook for that.
Right. I'm
So they
very
don't like to
familiar.
put themselves into that situation. But I think it is important that hopefully you all can get good data and discuss that with them, because if I understand this sheet here, what you all are using, this $8.9 million hole that we have to try to fill is based on an assumption of this revenue number that we're looking at, the 17.
Exactly.
So if they don't agree to that
It's even
and
more.
lowers it, then the amount that we got to fill gets bigger. So I think
Right.
it is important to us to have good information, and also good for us to be aware of this on the front end, that the hole that we're trying to fill could actually get larger if the county doesn't approve the increase of maintenance of effort. So
Right, definitely. And I thought it was good to work with Mr. Lukonen since what you just said. It's basically good question. Okay, so as we move into this document, we have we have the revenue assumptions there that we've looked at. And you can see for FY19, that's where that total of 99,156,000 comes from. We will be updating the numbers as we get more information, of course. The next couple pages are some summaries as of March for revenue and expenditure, just to give you something to reference. The next page is a graph of your expenditures for FY19 so far, sorted by object. So the largest piece you can see is 59.9% is your salaries and wages. The employee benefits, 22.1%. So you can see that eats up most of your pie there, salary and benefits. Then you have contracted services in the gray, supplies and materials in the yellowish, goldish, other charges, debt service, and then capital outlay. So that's where your money goes. The next page is the same pot of money, but divided by function. And so the largest piece there is 78%. That's your instruction and instructional support. That's where you want your money to go in a school system. 5.91 is your administration, fiscal, and central support. Maintenance and operations at 8.24. Transportation, 4.8. And other, which in this case is capital outlay and leases for 2.95%. Just to give you a view of it from that perspective. Then the next page, we actually have the summary for the whole budget. You can see the total. The second column of numbers over is the proposed FY19 budget. That's a summary page. That's where we get the 108, 129, 811. So that's where that number comes from. And the pages, all the pages that follow are a breakdown by function number. And then if that function number is broken down by school, the pages behind that divide those numbers all into the locations in the school. So not sure how you want to go through this, or if you just want to go to areas you have questions.
First of all, let me tell you that this is so much easier to look at. Thank you so much. Thank you. And Alview, thank you too.
Yeah.
And you and Alview. But I do think it's something that maybe board members need to be able to look at now that we've got it documented. It's not on the computer, that maybe we need to go through it. I have some questions about those employees that you penciled in a raise for. A couple were pretty substantial, and there may be other things that board members would like to have the time between now and the next session to questions you may have. I don't see any lights. Do you have any questions or comments?
Thanks. I do have a question about this particular, what's on the screen right now. So what you all are showing revised FY18, that would be the 17-18 fiscal year, correct?
Mm-hmm. The year we're in.
All right, you're showing that, I guess our current budget is 101.4.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to match that up with what this sheet says of 99.1.
Okay. We're confusing revenues and expenditures. So if down at the bottom, this gold, this is the 99 came from this revenue summary here for FY19.
Okay, I think I understand.
Yeah.
So the 101 is our budgeted expense.
Yes,
For
on the
this fiscal
expenditure
year.
side for FY18.
Okay, and the reason it was more is because we used some from fund balance last year. Okay, it takes me a little while, but I finally catch up.
No, that was a good question, because this here is totally looking at FY19. This one is bringing in FY18.
Any other questions, comments?
So you can see, just one more thing on that. So the document that's up on the screen now, you can see on the expenditure side, the expenditures are being proposed to increase by 6.6. The information in the yellow or gold box on this other sheet was comparing how much revenue are we getting and how much are we wanting to spend.
Yeah.
So it's easy to confuse the two.
Yeah, and I may have screwed you up because
of what you said.
Because of what I said. Because as additional BEP comes in next year, that will also increase the total revenue. But the BEP we receive this year will also increase that revised FY18 budget. So, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Donna,
On this pie chart right here,
Uh-huh,
is your mic on?
pardon?
yes.
This one,
It is.
78.01?
Yes. Can you tell me, is that where we should be?
That is the expenditure one?
Yeah, the general fund expenditures by function.
Yes, that's a very common percentage for
So-
staffing.
so
That's about
there's-
what we were in Oak Ridge as well. We were
Okay,
always
but
in the
there's
high
nothing
70s.
that stands out that is out of line or,
Not that I can say, no, because these other pieces are all basically on the operational side, and you have to have them. But generally, your instruction and your instructional support is from 75 to, high 70s is a healthy amount.
okay, so you're saying that this is pretty much where we should be?
I'm thinking yes, without doing a study of comparing
Right.
other people's, capital operations and maintenance, or, administration or transportation.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Kinzer,
Mr. Bates?
sorry. There we go. And I'm not sure if Ms. Morency had this question in mind, but I'll ask it. Are we a little top-heavy? Is this what's in the orange, the administrative, fiscal, and central support, the 5.9%? Is that higher maybe than other districts that we may need to take a look at?
I would have to get some data from other districts to speak to that. However, I can say in a general comment that, as your base grows of teachers and students, your central services have to grow proportionately, because the pieces of paper increase, and the dollar sign, the zeros at the end of the dollar sign increase. So it's doing the same processes, but more of it. So, again, I wouldn't want to just blanketly
Right.
say without comparing.
Without having information, but if we got information and it showed us that maybe statewide, that number is actually more around 5%, which is not a big difference, but whatever that number might be. Do you think that's something that we might be able to, as a board, to be able to say, hey, we're at 5.9% of our total budget. We'd like for you all to reduce that and make cuts to get that down to 5%. Do you think that's something that would be feasible, that if we made that sort of decision and gave that to you all would then be able to go back and say, okay, the board is reprioritizing. They do want us to try to see if we can make changes or cuts in that particular section to be able to reduce that. Is that something you think would be feasible? I'm not necessarily that you disagree with it, but I'm just asking the question if it's something that's feasible to be able to do.
I would say that once we got the results of the study, then we need to look at it. However, I am quite concerned about the audit results and about the fact that the auditors did recommend some positions in there. I know that with the size of this district and the number of staff, even in finance, is low, I really would be nervous about, and then other departments would have to speak for themselves, but in order to keep up with these and not have audit findings and do things correctly and have proper internal controls and all of the things that need to happen, I would be hesitant. However, processes can always be improved. Things can be streamlined. For example.
And I appreciate that. So we'd want input from staff as well. I mean, I guess what you're
Yeah.
saying, in your professional opinion, that may not be really the best thing to do. Sometimes you try to cut costs and you end up
Right.
putting yourself in a bind, and it ends up causing more
Right.
problems. I understand that, but I'm just, again, from a management standpoint, just thinking through the process, if that's
Yeah.
something that we could go through that process if we wanted to try to reduce
Look at it.
and get input, and because we may at the end of the day think, no, maybe that's not the prudent thing to do, but
Right.
that's something we could consider. Maybe.
Yeah, and what I was going to say too is there's always room for like process improvement. Like sometimes you keep doing something for years and the new person does it and the next person does, and then finally it's like, why are we doing this? And then it's like, that's taking up time. We're paying someone to do that, and no one's even using that data anymore. So maybe they need to be doing this instead. So, just a study of what actually needs to be done, and what kind of services are delivered and what end products are expected. Maybe some of the end products can be reduced, and so that, those staff can be freed up to do something else or whatever. So it's kind of a big study thing.
Ms. Morency?
And we may very well find that we're right where we're supposed to be, or that we're even below.
Right.
So just wanted to.
I have one question that I want to go back to just a minute for, in the gray area, textbooks, K2 resources. We kind of went by that pretty quick. And so
Sure.
before,
On this,
yes, on that sheet, if y'all are looking at it, it's the gray one down. And textbook and K2 resources have been a big discussion through the year. You gave us different scenarios under which, so this is the least of them, isn't it? What exactly was your thinking here?
That was I believe that was the middle option.
The middle option, okay. Just
Sorry, Ron.
speak to it.
Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Kinzer. Yes, ma'am, that was the middle of the road option. It was option 2. Option 1 was $1.4 million, and that means putting a book in the hands of every child. Option 2 would be going with reading and math across the district for every child, and then of course doing class sets in social studies and science and other subjects. So that's what that represents. And the dollar figure here would be $877,000, and that would include resources actually for K4. The thing to remember, as I mentioned a couple of board meetings ago, is that in this $877,000 cost, that includes the reading and math, and then on that math, that's a recurring cost of about $500,000 a year, because the books now are consumable books. They're not the hard textbooks, they're consumables. So these textbook companies want you to purchase every year. And if you choose to go with the online subscriptions, they want you to buy into the online subscription every year. So they're going to try to find a way to get their money either way. So if we choose to go with the adoption for math, it's going to be the consumable versions that we'd have to purchase annually. So it's a recurring cost of $500,000 a year, figured into that 877 cost.
What, are we talking about math for all the grades or just
Yes,
math?
ma'am, that's K-12 math. It will be math K-12.
K-12, okay. What kind of new resources are we thinking about K-2 since that's?
Okay, Read to Be Ready is the district initiative, and that initiative is aligned with the Tennessee Early Literacy Network.
Okay.
And it's the initiative that the Commissioner of Education is pushing down the pike. And after asking principals about it, who are the instructional leaders of the schools, this is the direction that we feel is the best direction to go into.
I would assume, too, that when we look at things, and obviously we're going to have to find some areas to make cuts to be able to come up with a budget, but we were presented at the work session $1.5 million in software licensing. That might be an area that we need to look at closely. A presentation was made, and but we really haven't discussed, but that will come up at the board meeting to which licensing. And I watched the presentation. I know board members that weren't here probably will watch it on the YouTube and maybe try to come. I would really like recommendations of which ones. Don't just tell me all of them are working, because that's a lot of software and it's a lot of licensing. So if we need to, and that's not even considering discovery or any of those. I mean, that's a whole nother. So that's a lot of money that we're putting in those things. So I would really like some direction from you all. It's more than just what the presentation we had. Anybody else? Ms.
I have a question for Karen. In our previous meetings, I've heard kind of the repeated phrase that like setup is the key. We've got to put it in right to get it to kind of work well. How much confidence do you have in these numbers, and especially speaking to the personnel side?
All of the staffing numbers were provided by HR to the department heads, and they worked on their individual areas. So I basically added up the numbers, so the individuals may want to speak to theirs.
How much confidence do you have that these numbers are accurate and that we are set up correctly?
I think that that's a question for the human resource person.
Where is Amanda tonight? Dr. Marzak?
Oh, sorry. Amanda had a human resource event in Murfreesboro. She was supposed to be heading back this afternoon. She'll get here as soon as she can. But going back to what Ms. Gagliano was saying, the HR salaries were given to all the department heads. So for example, Ron Woodard had the 71-100 line. So he went through and double checked to make sure everything was correct. Lori Brown checked her CTE. Lisa Venturas checked her special ed. So there were actually two sets of eyes on everything, one set of HR and one set for individual department heads. So Ron Woodard can talk about his 71-100 teacher line and attest to that one himself. Because remember, one of the things we talked about is not just one person controlling and one person having over. We talked about distributed eyes onto budgets to make sure everybody knows what's going on, not only with their individual budgets, but also a second set of eyes. And so that's what we've worked through this process of having two sets of eyes on everything. So, Ron, I don't know if you want to talk about your 71-100 line.
I can address any specific questions if there are any specific questions about that line, but I can tell you that we have done our due diligence. I can't tell you how many nights we stayed up to midnight and talking on the phone, and I've had to call Karen at midnight, 11 o'clock, and that's Eastern time, so it's probably 1 o'clock her time, and late nights with all of you and fussing with all of you. So we really did work hard on this. I want you to know that we really put a lot of hard work into this, and we also had some hard conversations in the conference room, and we wrestled with each other over this budget and what we would give up. Heard the conversation earlier about central office and whether or not we're top heavy or not. I'll tell you what, in my office, we're pretty lean. I'm supposed to have 4 individuals that work under me, and I'm down to 2 individuals. And I offered up 1 additional position where you see the director of programs. That's one of the things that we cut on this sheet. You'll see where we cut director of programs. We're not going to renew that position. That's one of the things that I offered up for the sake of the good of the county. And that just means that we'll divide those duties out amongst the 3 of us, and we'll get her done. We do need a secondary supervisor, so we do plan to hire for that position, but we're going to cut the director of programs, and that gives $117,000 back to the district to be used wherever wherever you all see fit. And there are other sacrifices that are being made and have been made all year. A lot of times we don't talk about it, we don't complain, we just go get her done. That's what we believe in doing, and so that's just kind of where we are. But I'd be happy to answer any questions that I could about the 116 line, or any questions that you may have about anything regarding the academic program here in Murray County.
Are there any other questions, or, excuse me, Mr. Dudley?
I guess, Dr. Marzak, since it all ultimately goes through your desk, how comfortable are you with the figures that these documents are built upon?
I believe the department heads have spent the better part of a month and a half making sure that this is on point and where it needs to be. I feel confident that they've done their due diligence and they've given us correct numbers. So that's where I feel. The department heads did a good job. I believe in our department heads. I think that's where we are, and we've got good numbers moving forward.
Excuse me.
Because I think since you've been here, we've tried to work with you and give you whatever you requested. I know there's a few things that you didn't get. You didn't get everything, but you got the majority of what you requested. And I think the county commission, as far as funding us, has tried to be cooperative. But I think as our budget continues to grow, that they're going to tighten up.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to be
as giving and as friendly as they have been last couple of years. So, so I just hope. I mean, it's been stated that our fund balance, we've rode that horse dry.
Yes, sir.
We can't pull much more out of fund balance, especially knowing that with 2 new schools. I know when we opened Spring Hill Middle, we had to pay for a large part of that first year operation out of fund balance.
Yeah.
And because state just doesn't give us a whole lot there. So I just hope that you're comfortable with these figures and they're figures we can rely upon, and as we can make a few cuts to get to where we need to be, and not have any financial misgivings during the middle of the year.
So one of the things, kind of going back and looking at some historical stuff that we did when David Bates was board chair, is, we looked at, how are we being funded over a 10-year average? Where is our budget? Where did we get money from the county commission, from funding bodies, in relation to where we should have been had we been allowed to spend our tax revenue as we were? And one of the things that we noticed last year is, had we been allowed to spend our tax revenue at where it was coming in, our annual operating budget last year would have been about $101 million. So if we look at that and look at some of the decisions that we made, we might not have had to use a lot of fund balance last year, but we weren't, and so that means we had to use our fund balance. And also last year I looked back at our budget last year. We actually reduced our expenditures by $1.373 million in order to get lean, to the point of going back to underfunding the 71-100-116 line in order to get a 3% for our staff, which they deserve 4, they deserve 5, 6% for the work that they put in. Because if you look at our scorecard growth, our teachers and principals are making some great strides with regards to our scorecard. If you didn't look at the scorecard that was uploaded yesterday, key number 7, you remember talking about total participation, total number of students participating in advanced placement, dual enrollment, getting an industry certification, work-based learning, or military prep by graduation. When we first released the keys and analyzed the previous year's results, we were at 29% of our kids taking advantage of that. As of the third quarter, 58.1% of our kids are now participating in Key 7. That is phenomenal growth, and that's a testament to our teachers and principals that are getting after it in their high schools to make sure the kids have a pathway to graduation. So the work that they do, we can give them 10%, it wouldn't be enough, because of how much they dedicate to the students of this system every single day. And the growth on that scorecard shows that, because they're getting after it. But we're kind of, Mr. Dudley, we're kind of at that point. We've spent fund balance over the last 2 years in order to do innovative things in our school district. We've cut things out of the budget that were previously funded in order to fund things in the school district that were good for kids. And I thought you saw the numbers. We're now up against the wall. So to me, we've really got 3 choices as a school board, as a district, superintendent board working together. 1, we go to the county commission. We've heard them say multiple times, tell us what you need. We accurately determine what we need, what that dollar figure is, and we go to the county commission and we ask for it. And we state it in student terms. So I think we've been really good with being funded by the county commission over the last couple of years, because we went to them with line item lists of what we're going to kids and what we're being put in schools. The second thing we would have to do, if we can't get to that point, is start scaling back initiatives, which I think would be detrimental to kids. But if there's certain things we want to do and we don't know where the revenue is going to come from and the county commission's not going to help us, then we need to look at start scaling things back that we were doing. The third possible thing is starting to adjust our FTEs, which are basically increasing our student-to-teacher ratios. We've got some really good student-to-teacher ratios in our school district, which I think are getting us some good results, not only in the key scorecard, but I think we're also going to see with test scores this year with TN Ready. I would hate to turn that dial, but that's the third option that we have before us if we don't get additional revenue from the county to meet some of those shortfalls that we have at this point. And talking to Karen, talking to Ron, talking to Stan, I've really racked my brain over the last month Is there a fourth option? Short of us taking budget money and playing the scratch off and playing the lottery, I don't know how we're going to get additional money. It's either from the county, it's from rolling back initiatives, or it's dialing our FTEs and changing some of those people to teacher ratios. But 2.5 years later, here's where we are. So I'm with you 100%.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Okay, on our FY19 proposed budget summary, you know, if you look like vocational educational program,
Yes, sir.
there's a 13% decrease. And you know, as you go down through, you know, you look at, there's a 42% decrease on attendance. Just keep stepping on down, you get down to the closest bottom to 73,400 early childhood education, you got a 1,602% increase. Could you explain all that?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Here you go.
While she's coming up, I can explain the preschool one. This is a result, if you look at FY18 budget for the early childhood education 73400, it only shows a $63,000 budget, and that's like way incorrect, but that's what's in there to date. Because the practice was that they did not budget ahead of time. They did a budget amendment when they got the grant. So that's why there's like really no budget there. So that is going to change. That when that budget amendment goes through, there'll be a budget there. So it won't be a 1,602% increase. But we could have continued on the same path, but that's really not how you do it. You need to budget it up front, even if it's a guess. So that's what we're kind of correcting in FY19. So, and I'll turn the other one over to.
Okay, and which one are you specifically referring to on vocational?
Let's see here. We're looking at line item 71,300, vocational education program.
Yes, sir.
We got a decrease of 13%, 577,811.
Okay. Thank you. I can go down line by line, starting with the 116. The decrease there, or the decrease that it shows in the proposed budget as opposed to the fiscal year 18 budget, there are 6 teachers that are currently located in 71,100. They're still budgeted, but they're in 71,100, and they're supposed to be in 71,300. So that will be corrected.
How did something like that happen? Yeah, are they supposed to be in a different line item?
Those particular ones are CTE teachers, and they're supposed to be in 71,300.
But they in another. Is that what I'm understanding you to say?
Exactly what? I'm not sure what you're saying.
Okay, you said that they were supposed to be in 71,300, but they're in
71,100.
71,100.
Which is the general line. So one of the teachers came from the general, for instance, one of our teachers at Culleoka came from the general purpose 71,100 line into CTE, and her pay is just hasn't been switched over, but the money's there. But anyway, that will be corrected.
Moved over the day that teacher changed, swapped out, moved over.
I would have to defer that to either HR or finance.
So basically, what we're talking about is a reclass. It won't change the bottom line.
Nope.
The bottom line's still going to stay the same. 71,100 is going to come down. 71,300 is going to go up. It's a reclass.
Yeah, but wouldn't this be classified as a audit finding if they're working in a versus where they get, what line item they're getting paid out of?
Yeah, and so that's one of the things that we're going to be changing in the budget before the budget goes for
it should have been changed, my question is, why wasn't it changed to the right one the minute that teacher was transferred? I mean, where is the problem and why isn't the problem being fixed?
Is the problem HR? Are they not in a very are they not telling and transferring and telling finance is not yours? You'd have to get it from HR too.
Right, it goes back to the setup thing we've talked about. You know, HR is the department that tracks the status of the employee. And then, so the FY18 budget, they're budgeted there, but being charged in a different place. So when we picked up the FY19 staff, they were picked up where they were charged. So the budget wasn't enough there because they're in the other place. So one thing leads to another.
But that should be corrected in round 2. Yeah. Correct, correct. And we've already worked up those.
I got one more question. Okay, on 72-110 attendance, you know, we got a 42% decrease, and you know.
One thing when we see attendance, it's in my mind, I'm always thinking about pupil services because it takes on a lot of tentacles and touch a lot of things. And one thing that it touches is the discipline aspect, and Catapult, which is close to right at $300,000, we will not have that next year. So that's a large percentage of the reduction. The other reduction of some position shifts, for example, I took over pupil services from Dr. Woodard, so there's a difference there. And then also, one of the areas that pupil services supervises is the supervisor of mental health and counseling, and that position aligned now with, as far as the salary and benefits, with the guidance. Although we still supervise it, that a person's salary, other salary, is no longer represented in attendance. It will be represented this next coming year in guidance to keep the counselors and the supervisor counselor right there together. So it's just a cleaning up there. But Catapult was the main $300,000 reduction that we will not offer next year.
Okay, so it will go away at the end of this school year, correct?
That is my understanding, yes, sir.
All right. How about 72-215? Are you alternate instruction program? Alternative school?
Yes, sir.
Sorry about it, I can't half see. Okay, we got a 145% increase. Can you?
Yes, what they're asking for at the alternative school, right now they have 5 instructional teachers. Of course, they have the educational assistants to support. They're on, in the past, we've been on a 5-period block day. Now, the secondary schools on a 7-period day. So scheduling is very difficult. They're asking for 2 additional teachers so that teacher A will not have to teach math and then later on in the day come back and teach something else and have a mixed schedule, or have multiple classes going on at one time, so that if you're teaching science, you're not teaching biology and chemistry at the same time just to make ends meet. They're coming to the alternative school with 7 classes. We only have room for 5, so they're asking for 2 additional teachers.
Okay. All right. Thanks, sir.
You're welcome.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Gagavano, I had a question going back to earlier on. Some of the notes you had here, and I appreciate you putting that together, about the kind of some guidelines for the 3% with the fund balance and 3%. Historic, I mean, you've got some experience in working with this in the past. What would you recommend us to keep on hand for that? That's something we've, as a board, have talked about for the years I've been on it. What is a good kind of rule of thumb to keep above the 3%?
Yeah, in school business management, the rule of thumb is 8 to 10% of your operating expenditures, and that would include that 3%.
Okay.
The 3% is the amount the state requires you to hold back, and they've even lightened up on that in emergency. You can tap into it, but when you do that, you're dropping below what you need for cash flow during the month, because that's the money, you know, it's coming in and going out and coming in and going out, and some months it's not coming in and it's still going out, so you have to have that buffer in there. A healthy fund balance is 8 to 10%. That will take some time for you to build up.
Okay, and I say that, and I kind of wanted it said out loud simply because as we go through this year after year, there's been a tendency in the past that if we build up too much money in the fund balance, it either we dip into it, or the county commission in the past has asked us to dip into it. I just would like it. I think it would be wise practice as a board for us to continue to kind of keep in mind that 3% is like the bare minimum. We should probably have an operating practice of keeping another percentage, whatever is in line with what other districts are doing, and try to stick to that rather than just considering that kind of squirreled away money when it really isn't. It is operating money. It's money we need to operate on those leaner months when the revenue goes down, the tax revenue is not coming in.
Just a further little bit of detail about the breakdown of the 10%. What it's typically made up of is the 6%, which is for your cash flow, and then the 4% is for in the event of an emergency. If you had a situation where a tornado came through, yes, you're going to have insurance, but you're going to have some operating costs up front, or maybe an HVAC system goes down and there's no choice; it has to be replaced right away. So those kinds of things that you kind of allow in your fund balance, so you've got something to tap into.
Okay. Well, I definitely appreciate having this information. This is very helpful to us to start to look at that as a standard, not just extra money that's sitting in the bank. Thank you.
And you can also build in a component that, maybe if you reach a certain percent, then you're going to look at what's extra, and then you're going to use that specifically for non-reoccurring items, equipment that has to be replaced, or, some one-time initiative. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I believe Ms. Powers was next. Oh, no? Okay, excuse me then.
Thank you, Ms. Kinzer. And just to follow along the thought process of Mr. Moore, I think the big job is going to be for you to educate the commissioners, because if we're holding 10% of our operating, that's $10 million that we're going to have sitting in the bank. And when we go to them and ask for funding, and there's $10 million sitting in the bank, they're going to be like, what in the world are you asking us funding for when you're sitting on this pile of cash? And so that's something that is going to be a big uphill educational task. Whatever you can do to help them to understand what you think is good, sound accounting practices, and maybe have that reminder every time that you go over there, and maybe give them stickers, with it on there, and so maybe eventually they'll start coming around to that.
Yeah, I have dealt with that before with a city body, and they would look at ours and say, yours is larger than ours, and we really need to spend that. And but at the same token, because the two are sort of wrapped together financially, it really does help the counties. And if we had borrowing power, which we don't, we help the county have a good borrowing power by having a larger fund balance, because your rating's better. You're less of a risk. So it does have some positive. Yeah. And you might have to strike some happy medium, between.
Any more questions, discussion? Well, obviously, we're just in a work session, so I'm sure that we need time to look at this closer and peruse it. From what you're saying, some of these numbers are going to change. You won't affect the bottom line. Well, I think we have lots of things to think about, and I don't know when we have another meeting scheduled.
Our next meeting was tentatively scheduled for, give me 2 seconds.
Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, didn't you, Mr. Moore?
While the directors or superintendent's looking for that, I just did want to say, I am very happy, and I think Mr. Pennings was saying this as well, to see us finally budgeting for maintenance as an actual budget item and not just whatever money we find in the couch cushions. I do think it's low. I understand why you're doing that, but I want to firmly say we need to be asking for what we need to operate, and $1 million does not operate maintenance for our facilities, and we all know that.
Yeah.
I know why you're doing that. I can appreciate that, but I really, and I've been saying this for a couple of years, we have got to get it to where what we're asking for really represents what it costs to operate this school system. And $1 million worth of maintenance does not take care of it. And I don't even think $2 million does. I think all the numbers we've ever seen show it's considerably higher than that. Should be somewhere around $4.5 million as a kind of a minimum on that. So I really think we need to start getting to that point, because that is really what it costs to operate this school system, and it needs to be in there. And we're doing ourselves a disservice. We're doing the county commission a disservice to not include that. It's kind of a hidden number that we end up paying for somehow, or we don't pay for it, and then we pay for it with schools that are falling apart. So I just hope we can continue to move. It's a start, but I really want us to move to where we're really representing a true number there.
And I think Stan echoes that sentiment, and we're all kind of at that same place as well.
And if I could just speak to that, of course, the capital budget portion of our budget, we've been working through the process of the work session and the budget meetings. It was on the work session agenda, and it is on the agenda for the 30th. I did send you all a document that we've put together to prioritize, but it shows we still have, including the maintenance needs that would be identified for 2018, about $18 million worth of deferred maintenance needs that have not been addressed yet through any kind of capital funding. And even $1 million, $2 million, or $4 million will never catch us up on those unless there's something. I mean, we need to be in, as you say, according to the EMG assessment, about $4 million a year is what's expected to break every year that we would need to replace. But we got to catch up before we can address that $4 million by fixing the things that broke 3 years ago or, needed to be replaced. We've replaced most everything that's broken that was absolute necessary, but a lot of things that are broken that you can live with, we haven't. So yes, I would agree.
Ms. Kinzer?
Oh, Mr. Pennings?
And I agree with Mr. Moore. If we figure you needed $2 million this year, but you're only going to ask for $1 million, so you're figuring you needed $2 million next year too. So now you're going to need $3 million next year because you didn't take the $1 million that you needed this year. And that's how we got in this predicament in the first place, by not getting the maintenance money that we needed to keep up our buildings. And you've seen where that got us, in a hole that I don't know if we'll ever dig out of. So, I mean, this is just a work session, but if you need $2 million, ask for $2 million.
And kind of going back to, scenario number one, going to the county commission, telling them what we need. That's kind of where I think we are, because it's not only facilities and maintenance, it's also academics. It's also the future with initiatives, things that you added to the strategic plan, talking about diploma, talking about tech, talking about creativity. You guys stated that those were things that we need to be doing as a school system if we're going to remain on the cutting edge and we're going to attract those families to our school system. You guys saw the email that I sent today from the realtor, who said that it's Murray County's never really been a draw, but now I've got parents saying I want to go see Murray County Public Schools. We need to stay on that cutting edge, or we have the potential to lose some of that clientele.
And we also need to attract and retain those qualified teachers.
Yes, we do.
That to me is imperative, and we'll talk afterwards.
Yes, we do.
All right.
Our next meeting is tentatively scheduled for May the 1st, which I believe is 1 week from today.
What day is that on?
I believe it's a Tuesday.
Okay, May 1st.
Correct?
Excuse me.
Am I right?
Mr. Bates.
Ms. Kinzer, thank you. I think Mr. Pennings raised
Yes.
a very good point, that the reason we got to where we had to tackle a $30 million list, that didn't happen overnight. That was accumulation of $2 million this year, $2 million that year. It probably took 10 years to compile that. And so I think now that we're getting caught up, I think it's incumbent upon us for future boards to try to stay ahead of that, where we don't allow another $30 million list to develop. So I think that's important. Another thing, Ms. Gagliano, I think when it comes to capital expenditures like the maintenance, I do not think that counts towards maintenance of effort. And I think that's why they've maybe historically done this juggling act of having the operating budget and then putting things on the capital budget, because they know they're not on the hook for that in future years from a maintenance of effort standpoint. But I'm not sure whether it necessarily matters. I think you can still put it in operating, but you're going to have to explain that to them. They're going to see the budget increase on expenditures, and they're going to think that's what you're increasing my maintenance of effort. So you're going to have two numbers. You're going to have to say, yes, the total expenditures is increasing, but really the only thing that's increasing the maintenance of effort is probably a lower line. Now, you need to get with the state to be able to verify all that, or you may already know that.
I know that capital does
cover to
not
cover.
count. Capital is not in the maintenance of effort formula.
Okay.
It's outside of it. And I know that different districts have had memorandums of understanding that they've beefed up the capital budget for a year, and they've said the money has to specifically go to capital, and it is not part of maintenance of effort.
Well,
So
just keep
that's
that in
very
mind. So
much
like
so.
this figure where we're putting in the
So that could be a
million,
strategy for us.
they see that, yeah, they see the total increase, and they're going to think it's all maintenance of effort increase. So you're going to have to do that's when you're going to earn your,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, to
You
help
could
them
do a
to
$4
understand
million
that, so,
request for capital maintenance outside of maintenance of effort.
yeah.
And let me just speak to the fact that that $1 million is budgeted in the 76-100 line, and that typically is where, when you've approved money that's moved from fund balance over into that's where it's gone. So it's the same thing as typically what we've done is waited till October and saw what our fund balance was, and then moved money from fund balance to take care of
Yeah.
capital maintenance. Now you're budgeting it on the front end.
So there's a specific formula that includes certain account numbers, and it doesn't include capital in the maintenance of effort formula.
Okay.
So I guess, I think that we need some direction, because we have a week before the next meeting. And Dr. Marzak mentioned 3 possible strategies. 1, asking for all of it at the county. 2, cutting back on initiatives and other expenses. Or 3, right-sizing the FTE, which is not all of a bad thing either. If you have the right, you might have class sizes that are really, really small that are taking away from something else. So it might be a good thing to look at, because
None
most
of
of your
those-
money is in salaries and benefits.
I understand that, but none of those scenarios have any increase for teacher pay.
Right, that's not included
of 'em.
here.
Right.
And it needs to be added.
Absolutely.
But what I'm saying is, without even adding it, we are where we are. So we need to have some direction from you on what your comfort level is and what direction we have to go, so we don't have to do it all at the very last minute. I don't know if you can poll the board or something after, so they've had time to think about it and see what direction they want us to go. Just so we don't leave here and leave it, and
We can't fund $108 million. That's the direction I'm in. And I would like to know what the recommendation from the state is for teacher salaries. I'd like to look at the beginning. I don't think we've got a firm figure with that in it.
We'll find out.
And I think that's important. So maybe that's the direction I'd like to see, is keying those numbers in. I'd also like to know what the county is giving in their budget process for their employees. Because if they're getting a 2%, I think it would be only fair that we would do the same. Those are things I would like to know going forward. I also want to be sure these figures are right, and I think that this board that we're just a little bit shell-shocked over the audit findings and the fact that a lot of the audit findings were mistakes that were made on, and there were things that have gone on that we kept people on payroll, we paid them too much money, we didn't do this, we didn't do that. So I want to make sure all those figures are correct, and that whatever department it is that we need to check, then we need to do that. Anything else? You
So-
told me the scenarios here, and I'm sure I'm gone to another scenario, so.
So,
Number
so is
4.
there, so we definitely, I'm hearing you say that we definitely need to relook at what we're requesting for capital and maybe a different strategy as far as having it outside of this total because of maintenance of effort. Also, that we need to take a look at the salary schedule structure.
Yes.
For attracting new teachers. We need to consider total package as well as salary. We need to find out what the county's doing for their cost of living increase. We are waiting for direction from the state on what they are willing to fund.
Right.
So those are all of the things that we can still be working on with the budget. But as far as the budget as it stands right now, are there areas or initiatives or directions, studies that you want us to do to reduce that overage that we see before us right now?
I have gone through this and highlighted those people who are getting raises, some of which maybe already have been approved, but I would like an explanation on some of those.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Excuse me.
you keep talking about increasing class size. If that would save us money in that, we need some kind of idea, increase the class size to what and how much money that would save us.
Yes, there are, the standards from the state are by levels, you know better than I. And you look at every class at every school, at every grade, and look at what the ratios are, and, you know, if you can save someone's position by moving them to where you're needing them versus where they are now, and it's a very small class size. So it's a lot of analysis and seeing what you could actually save. And then it might mean that, you know, your new schools, you'd have teachers already on board that could be moved to the new school, so you're not hiring someone brand new. So you don't just keep adding. You're always looking at the ratios, because that is the total driver of your budget.
I know years ago when I was an observer at every board meeting, they would every year give, and the commissioners would come and ask for it, a sheet that would say the class size of each teacher. And it was just a spreadsheet that they could look at. They didn't always understand that CTE classes have a maximum size, and how come there's just this few in there and there's this many over here.
You can footnote that.
Right, and, but that might be something good for us to see and have, because that would make us a little bit understanding as to how many, you know, are we got schools that are maxing out with 35 in a classroom, which is the maximum size, and but yet we've got another class of schools or classes in that school that maybe have 10 or 12. And so that really would be a way to maybe maximize the staff we have, and I think it would be really good to look at.
Okay.
Which one of these?
I don't care. Want to pick one of us?
I think I'll pick you, Mr. Morris.
Okay, two things on that. I know we're all, I get to do this every year, but I know we're all talking about that teachers deserve millions and millions of dollars worth of raises. Let's keep in mind that 3% based on the numbers here is over $2 million added to this number. So I just want to be, I mean, while it's nice to say teachers deserve all the money in the world, these are real numbers we have to work with here, so we just need to keep those numbers, the real numbers in mind as we make these pieces fit. If we're going to talk about, if you're going to be researching starting pay changes, we did this last year. I got to say, we've got to look at what those other competing counties are offering as far as the full benefits package, because I'm adamant that we have got a very rich benefits package in this county, and I know some people don't look at it, but it's a reality, and you can't just raise one piece. You have to be very mindful of all of that. And again, we're adding dollars to the budget, yet again, if we start doing that. I know it doesn't sound like much. It tends to snowball as we look at it. So I just want to make sure we're looking at all those pieces. I believe last year that we were given some comparison information that not only told the starting salaries, maybe it was earlier this year, I can't remember, as well as what some of the benefits were. If we're going to talk about it, I'd like to see that information again, so that we're comparing apples to apples when we're doing that.
And something else to consider, just keep on your mind that every time you do a percentage increase, next year, your steps, your salaries, your
Yes.
pension, your Medicare, everything is increased on that end by 3% as well. So something to consider, the snowball effect of the increases year after year.
No, I mean, I appreciate that, because, I mean, that's, we're doing a better job as a board of looking ahead, and that's some of the things we're looking at, is starting to look at what 3% this year means more the next year and the next year.
Yep.
The same thing as we're bringing these new schools online. That little bit we're asking for, which is still a lot of money here, is gonna, when those schools actually do come online, all of a sudden is a lot. I like that we're finally talking about not just what the impact is next year, but what the impact is for the next 2, 3, 4
Yep.
years. I think it's finally getting to where we're talking about those things, and that's very important.
Mr. Bates.
Thank you, Ms. Kinzer. I think you were asking for input and about the 3 different possible scenarios. I guess for me, I mean, I still need more information as to what exactly our revenue situation or picture is going to look like. So once we get better numbers,
Sure.
hopefully from the county as far as what they're going to value the penny on that, and then also more up-to-date BEP information to know exactly how much money that we're dealing with from a funding standpoint. And I think for me, I mean, I'm not ready to make this decision now, but I think all options have to be on the table, including making cuts to what's being requested. And so I think I'm not there yet. I'm not ready to make a decision for me personally yet, though.
Okay. Just a little bit about the revenue and the BEP. I forgot to mention, in talking with the county, they're not going to have the value of the penny until the end of May. It's a reappraisal year, and that's what they're telling me, the end of May. And then for the BEP, as you know, we get an update every month. So mid-May, we'll be getting another update. It's usually mid-month. So that can go up or down every month. But what we might want to do just to prepare is sort of have a list of, if everything goes great with revenue and if everything doesn't go great, what's our priority list of cuts?
Let me ask you this, is a week enough, or do you all want to put this budget, we have 2 weeks, because we have regular board meeting is on Monday night, so.
I think it would be helpful to wait.
If as much time as you guys could possibly give us, because this is a lot of work to do, and we'll get it done. But also remember that June 4th, 5th, or 6th. So we've got to have this done for the county commission by then.
Well,
but when we get more information, we'll be able to give them more information. And,
Yeah.
You know.
and we have a work session on the 7th, but maybe you need to talk with Chair Parker and let's see and let us know. I think
It's too soon on the
it's
first.
too soon on the 1st with all the information we're asking of you, and we need to digest this a little bit better. I mean, look at it line by line, and thankfully we can. I mean, it would drive me crazy last year going through and finding the different things. Okay. I think this is much easier to read.
Good,
Yeah.
good.
So,
Are we talking about pushing this out another week?
yes.
May
Awesome.
8th.
I was going to recommend that.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
but just keep in mind, there's a work session on the 7th, and then the 8th would be the next night. But, I think that would be better. The board meeting, they have to be prepared for the board meeting, so this might be better for them.
We're actually preparing for the board meeting this week.
Of course you are.
Yes.
That's what
For-
you're
for
supposed
the
to
May
do.
board
You paid
meeting.
the big bucks to
No, the
do
May
that.
board meeting.
I
Yeah,
know, I'm just.
yeah.
Okay, do you want to tentatively say the 8th?
Yes.
Okay. All right, seeing no more lights, this meeting's adjourned.